all you heroes and champions, crows, pirates, and inquisitors. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast. I'm Shelby.
And I'm Austin.
And we are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From the Maker to Lyrium to Aravels, we will cover it all. There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hey, Shelby.
Hey, Austin.
You ready to talk about some Dragon Age?
I am. We haven't talked about Dragon Age in like 2 weeks. So yeah, definitely.
Excited to get back to it. Well, as you all know, we are continuing our Factions of Thedas series. And so last week we talked about the Templars. And this week we're going to be discussing something very adjacent to the Templars. And that is the Seekers, who, if you just play the games, you kind of know just a little bit about. You definitely learn more in Dragon Age Inquisition, but if you're not a Codex reader like Austin, you might not learn these things.
True. True. And if you didn't read Asunder and you just played Inquisition, there's still probably a lot of things you missed out on about the Seekers.
Mm-hmm. You want to just dive in?
Sure. All right. Well, I always start with my fun facts.
Mm-hmm.
And the first fun fact I have is their full name. Their full name is the Seekers of Truth. And they were originally part of the First Inquisition. So they did not just come out of nowhere. They did not start as their own thing. They started as part of the First Inquisition. And that will be really important, and we'll get into it a little bit later. And if you've already listened to some of our other episodes, we've talked a little bit about the First Inquisition already. And if you are a fan of Inquisition, then you will know that Cassandra Pentagast, who's one of my favorite characters.
That's not her full name.
Okay, well, I don't remember all 18 of her names, so. But she is a member of the Seekers, and part of her personal quest in that game is involved with the Seekers. So that's how we get a lot of this information. So the Seekers, as an organization, they act as a check on the power of the Templars. And I think that's why a lot of people don't know about them, because they're pretty secretive. And they also act and behave in a very investigative and interrogative way. They're not trying to be public about who they are. They're trying to be more in the shadows, behind the scenes kind of things, generally, because their intention is to root out corruption and protect the Chantry from any internal threats as well as external threats. So they also may become, not always, but may become involved in the hunting of particularly cunning or evasive apostates. So that's a little bit about what they do. But it's also really, really important to note that generally Templars fear and despise the Seekers, because the Seekers involve themselves when the Templars are making mistakes or being corrupt or being unjust or basically just not doing their job.
Yes, and if you're ever wondering, the question can arise with the Mage Templar debate about who watches the Watchers, who watches the Templars. And the answer is the Seekers. The Seekers
right.
Watch the Templars.
Right, exactly. And it's definitely not a perfect system by any means, because who watches the Seekers? Well, technically the Divine, but also, as we know from Asunder and Dragon Age Inquisition, if this system begins to break down at all, especially with the head of the Seekers, it's really easy for the Templars and the Seekers to kind of take control of everyone else, or at least break away and try to do that. So, let's move on a little bit. So, generally, the right hand of the Divine is almost always a Seeker, and that's what Cassandra's role is before she begins the Inquisition. So they very much are seen as like enforcers of Chantry law. So if Templars are like the everyday police force of Thedas, then Seekers are more like a middle ground between the military, spies, the FBI, and the CIA, kind of all rolled into one. And it's also really important to note that a senior Seeker outranks all Templars. So like the lowest, like regular everyday Seeker outranks the Night Vigilant, which is the top of the Templar order. So that creates a really interesting power dynamic.
Well, yeah, and you kind of see this in the Dawn of the Seeker animated film with which follows Cassandra's kind of like what she was doing before she's sent to find and interrogate Varric and figure out what's going on in Kirkwall.
I think it's way before that though.
Well, it ends with the Divine giving her the writ of the Inquisition.
I don't think so because the divine in the movie is the one before Divine Justinia.
Yes, that is correct. But there is
So
that big thing where she hands her the
yeah,
book that has like the writ to like start the Inquisition.
I don't remember that. But I mean, I believe you. But yeah, there's just the whole time where she's serving as the right hand before she goes to interrogate Varric and
Yes.
everything.
And then so we have, but they talk. What my point was that in that film you see like the almost the relationship between the Seekers and the Templars in a point of like the Templars kind of like are vying for a point of like, well, you could use the Templars, you don't have to use the Seekers or whatever to the Divine.
Mm-hmm.
And very much, especially from Cassandra, a younger member of the Seekers, she just like, well, Templars, like, what good are you? Like this sense of superiority.
Yeah, and skepticism towards the Templars.
Yes.
Which I think makes sense if you think about, and we'll get into this later, but it makes sense if you think about how they exist as two different orders, right? Like the biggest difference between them is that Templars ingest, take lyrium, and Seekers don't. So Templars are literally dependent on an addictive and toxic substance, whereas Seekers are not. So, of course, they would have a superiority complex. It just makes sense.
Yes.
Okay, well, my last fun fact is about the insignia of the Seekers. And it does have a really long history. And it's basically, if you remember it, it's basically an all seeing eye. And this comes from one of the constellations, the Vissus constellation. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, but oh well. So this constellation, according to its codex, used to be the symbol for the Lady of the Skies. If you remember this, also from Inquisition, when you go to the Fallow Mire or in the Frostback DLC, you meet some Avar, and they often talk about the Lady of the Skies, and she's kind of their main god or goddess. So this symbol of the Seekers is connected to her from the Avar, which is really interesting connection. Definitely some places that they can take that in the future. Nothing, official yet, but it's a really interesting connection that I think is worth mentioning. And then also I wanted to mention that the symbol for the Inquisition is the same. It's just the eye with a sword behind it. And so it kind of relates to how the Inquisition of the past, the first Inquisition, eventually became the Seekers and the Templars. So the Inquisition symbol was split in half, with the Seekers keeping the eye for their organization and the Templars taking the sword for theirs.
It really is poignant in their symbols because the Templars are the military arm of the Chantry. Like, of course, they would take the sword. They're the first line of defense against demons to exert the will of the Chantry, but like the Seekers are that behind the scene investigative force, the Watchers of the Watchers. And so that all-seeing eye really fits.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's a really great point.
All right. Well, what about their structure?
Okay, so we don't really know. um, I feel like it's 50-50 in this season where sometimes we know a lot, and if we know the structure, we know a lot about the structure. And then all the other times are we know nothing, or we know this one thing and that's it. And that's about how we are today. Generally, the structure is pretty unknown, but thought to run parallel to the Templars. The one fact that we do know is that the leader of the Seekers is the High Seeker. And that's it.
Is it hot? It's so interesting because I feel like they do an interesting interchange because I just played Promised Destruction quest today.
Yeah.
And throughout there, Cassandra and the spoiler alert, the Dead Seekers that you find there all refer to Lucius as Lord Seeker.
Right.
You're right. Like there are other points, like in the film, and I think in Asunder they refer to High Seeker. So it's maybe they're interchangeable, but
Yeah, I think it has to be interchangeable, because they're both referred to so often, and we don't really know. Yeah, we don't really know. I think they're both are accurate to refer to the top dog of the Seeker, but just know sometimes the game says hi, sometimes the game says Lord. They're both pretty accurate, but again, we chalk this up to we don't really know much about the structure. If we knew as much about this structure of the Seekers as we do the Templars, we could probably give you a little bit more of a definitive answer, but we just can't.
and they might not be as structured because there's not as many of them.
That's true, and also they might not be as structured because there's not as much of a need for them to be structured.
Right.
They're only overseeing Templars, so you send one or two out to a circle to examine, investigate, and watch them. You don't need 18 different ranks to do all this other stuff that you would normally need for the Templars. So,
Right. And they don't send a lot of them to
no, one or two,
like,
yeah.
Cassandra was en route to Kirkwall to basically bring Meredith and the Templars in line. And they were just sending her.
Which is frightening. I mean, I think she could take Meredith, but
Well, it's
yeah.
interesting because of, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but a Seeker could very easily take on several Templars with their abilities.
Oh, yeah. And obviously mages.
Right, because they basically have the ability to manipulate anyone that relies on lyrium.
Or magic.
Yeah. Well, magic is fueled by lyrium.
Right. Yeah, so true. Well, let's get into the history a little bit. So, not to beat a dead horse, but we don't know a ton about the founding, at least, of the Seekers, but we do know that they originated sometime before the First Inquisition, but, this is actually kind of a disputed fact. Some people think the Seekers were founded before the First Inquisition, and some people think they were founded as the First Inquisition. But to me, it's kind of like, tomato, tomato, like they become the First Inquisition. So to me, that distinction doesn't matter a ton.
Just a quick reminder for those of us who may not remember from previous episodes, but why was the First Inquisition founded?
I was getting there. So, yes, as a reminder to everyone, the First Inquisition was founded during a time of total unrest in Thedas. There are apostates running wild, there's all kinds of violence, all kinds of fighting, just generally a lawless land. When I read about the First Inquisition during this time, I really think a lot about the hinterlands during the Mage Templar War, especially when you first go to the hinterlands, and there's all that fighting everywhere between mages and Templars, and they come out of the woodwork to attack you even, and you're not even taking a side in the war. It really reminds me of that. So it's just generally a lawless place. And And, this is before the chantry existed. So the chantry laws don't exist. So we're talking a long, long time ago. And the first Inquisition, they hunted cultists, rogue mages, apostates, like I've already said, as well as demons and abominations, and probably, if I had to guess, a few darkspawn as well. And their goal was to protect all innocent people. Whether or not they did this adequately or fairly is another question, but that was their goal, and that was the time that they first came into existence.
So this is just a time frame wise. This is kind of happening after Andraste's betrayal and death, but before Justinia the First is elected divine and establishing.
Yes.
So that kind of transition between ancient and divine age.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's like maybe 300 years after Andraste and before the founding of the Chantry. So it's kind of a long time if you really think about it. And like the nations, while they've been split up from, Andraste and Mafrath's sons, the borders and the empires are not quite, what's the right word? They're not quite like steady. They're not quite stable. They're not quite
established
countries. Right. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So it would be really lawless, probably lots of like piracy and violence and all those kinds of things. So they kind of step in as, this organization that wants to help the everyday person. And I can respect that.
And like, it makes sense that this kind of time of turmoil comes about, because if we think about our own history, we're talking about the fall of the Tevinter Empire for the most part, which, Tevinter has a lot of parallels to Rome. And when Rome fell, Europe kind of went into this time of chaos.
That's true.
And all these different powers are coming up over Europe, and we see that in Thedas. Like, as Tevinter Imperium falls, you start to see all of the baby steps of these countries coming forth. Navarra, Orlais, even a little bit of Ferelden, even though they'll come much later. But
that's a really good point, and I think that's super true. But I did bring, before we move on, a Codex quote, as I usually try to do. And this really gets to the heart of like why at the beginning of Inquisition everyone is like afraid of what a second Inquisition will be. And what will that mean? Because we can talk all that we want about the goals of the First Inquisition and like what they wanted to achieve, but as we know from human history and just even our own lives, what we want to happen isn't always what actually happens. So here's my codex. The Seekers came down against every group at one time or another. Their, quote, Inquisition gaining notoriety for being on no one's side but their own. They considered themselves to be good people, however, followers of the Maker's true commandments. And that comes from the First Inquisition Codex. So, to me, what this codex says is like, they only trusted themselves to know what's right, what's moral, what's good. And anyone who dared to like step out of line or do something against them was going to be their next target.
Yeah.
Even if they tried to be good.
And it's very familiar. Especially if you've played through Trespasser DLC, the kind of state in which you are. It's a very cyclical view of history, where the Second Inquisition's stance is at the beginning of Trespasser is very similar to what that codex is talking about. There's a lot of people who think the Inquisition, while they did good, they sealed the breach and all of that they were bullies and they were seeking to upset the political balance of the world.
True. Very true. Okay, well, just to move on a little bit. So in 120 Divine, which is like 20 years after the end of the Ancient Age. The baby chantry is one of its like first big things. They got the first Inquisition to sign the Navarran Accord, and we've talked about this before, but it's a really big moment in history, so I'm going to reiterate what it is. Essentially, the Navarran Accord abolishes the First Inquisition, as you were just saying, and creates the Circles of Magi, the Templars, and the Seekers of Truth as 3 independent orders. And they've all been existing ever since then until like 940 Dragon.
Yep. Which they all still exist as, well, I guess in 940 Dragon, the Circles don't exist anymore, but the Templars and Seekers exist, just not as they were.
They exist, but not under the arm of the Chantry.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think now's a good time for a break.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, let's go to that break.
Fellow survivors, Vault 76ers, patriotic Americans. This is Lieutenant Colonel Valeria of the New Enclave. Follow our stories as our cast of characters emerge from the White Springs bunker to face an uncertain future in an Appalachia overrun with monsters. But as I always say, the wasteland isn't going to tame itself. Join us here on the Modus Files. We can be found on any Enclave-sanctioned network, including Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and more. Keep your Pip-Boys handy and listen for further instructions. Valeria out.
So, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this.
I'm listening.
Ah, you've returned. A letter arrived for you.
All right, so welcome to the middle of the show where we just kind of focus on some housekeeping stuff and all of that. I want to let you know at this time that we do have a Patreon. If you are looking to support us, if you like what we do, you can go ahead and go subscribe to our Patreon. We have different tiers that offer different things. We are running a sort of promotional now that the first 5 patrons will have their names read out on the show until the end of time. Or the end till we run out of Dragon Age to talk about.
Which is hopefully never.
Yes, hopefully never. And so our 2 patrons that we have now are Genesis and Lisa Max. So I just want to say a special thank you to them for their support and supporting us in that. And so, yeah, you can go find the link in the episode description. Subscribe to different tiers. You get any benefits from, just ad-free episodes to being able to come on the show with us. So, yeah, you can find us there. And if supporting us financially is not something that you can feasibly do or something you want to do, that is totally fine. We recognize that that's not for everyone, but there is another way to support us, and that is to go into either Spotify or Apple Podcast or both and leave us a review. On Spotify, it's just a simple ranking system of 1 out of 5 stars. Apple, you can actually leave a written review, and we really appreciate that. And if you write us some words and give us a 5-star review, we will read your review in a future episode of the show. And so, Shelby, do we have a review?
We do. I don't think we've read this one so far. But if we have, y'all will just have to listen to a repeat. So this is from Old Rock 27, and their little headline is "Swooping isn't always bad. ... Love the backstory and history of this game. Keep up the great work." Thank you so much for that review.
Thank you. And I guess swooping isn't always bad. I would say that the Inquisition definitely swoops. All right.
Well, I also have a herald too.
A herald? We haven't done a herald yet.
Mm-hmm. I know. So this one is from Psych88 in our Discord server. And if you're not in the Discord server, you should definitely be in it, because that's where we talk about all things Dragon Age. We talk about our episodes, debate, all kinds of things. And we also judge Austin when he tries to kill Zevran in his current playthrough of Dragon Age Origins.
Listen, I just wanted to see what happens.
Okay, well, that's what YouTube is for. But Psych gave us his Herald of Andraste, And his herald is Morrigan, a Kunari mage. And she, of course, sides with the mages because she is one. Morrigan also saves the wardens, but Stroud did stay behind in the Fade. Morrigan loves a strong man, and no one is stronger than, of course, the Iron Bull himself. And he, of course, Iron Bull, is grateful to Morrigan because she saves the Chargers. And everything else in Inquisition, Syke hasn't quite gotten to with Morrigan, the Kunari mage, yet. But the next major plot point for him is probably going to be Wicked Eyes and Wicked Hearts. And he says that he's probably going to go for siding with Briala. So we are definitely interested in what other choices you'll make. And thank you so much for sharing Morrigan with us.
And good luck in Wicked Eyes, Wicked Hearts, because being a Kunari and a mage is not going to do you any favors.
That is very much accurate.
All right. And then always remember, you can show us your heroes, hawks, or heralds. You can send them to us in the Discord if you're there. You can email them to us at dalorecast@gmail.com, or you can tweet them at us at dalorecast on Twitter. So yeah, you ready to go back to finishing talking about the Seekers?
Let's do it.
All right.
My friend.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun.
Hello, gentle listener. Every Friday, be sure to tune in.
What the hell are you doing, Ampersand?
Hi, Charlie. I'm sorry I broke in.
I thought I was the only one that talked to myself.
Well, I'm letting everyone know about the Fumbling Four and the Almighty Crit.
Woohoo! It's a 5e live play podcast. Join us every week. Where do we find it, you old crusty coot? Anywhere you can get all your podcasts.
Woohoo! You find it every Friday, you stupid cat!
All right. So, Seekers appear throughout most of Dragon Age. They, I think, are mentioned in Origins and are actually a pretty major factor in both DA2 and Inquisition. And I do say that they're a major factor in DA2 because they give us like the whole plot device of why Varric is telling this story with the introduction of Cassandra Pentagast as a main character. And like we've mentioned earlier, they also appear in the book Asunder, as well as the short animated film Dawn of the Seeker. And we watched Dawn of the Seeker recently. It is interesting, a good story. I really like it. Not the best animation, but I love Cassandra, so I liked it because of that. And I do think it's a good backstory into like why Cass is the way she is. So I liked it. I don't know. What did you think, Austin?
I think it was a perfectly good story. And like, you know, a lot of times these video game films are not good and they create plot holes or, you know, breaks in canon and other things. But this film does not do that. It sticks very, very authentically to the world of Thedas that is laid out in these three games.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I will say, if you've watched the Mass Effect animated movie, what is that one called?
Paragon Lost.
Paragon Lost. The animation is definitely better than that one. I'm still a little traumatized by the Krogan.
Yes.
Anyway.
But, I think that the introduction of the Seekers is one of the most attracting things to me, that attracted me about DA2, because, so in Dragon Age Origins, you know, we meet the Templars, and the Templars are kind of the Watchers of the Mage, but Dragon Age Origins doesn't really have a mention of the Seekers. I mean, there might be an obscure codex somewhere, but not that I remember.
I think there's a mention in the Broken Circle quest. I think Gregor mentioned something about a Seeker. And there are codex. I think that codex entry I read before, I'm pretty sure that comes from Origins as well. but it's very obscure. You're right, and it's not discussed.
Right.
It's just like a kind of throwaway line. So yeah, it's a little bit of a late addition. It's not something that's fully fleshed out from the beginning, for sure.
And so you get that, and Varric very well like talks about the Seekers, and you're like, oh well, what are these Seekers? Like, who are they? And like, you know, Cassandra looks very Templar in.
Yes.
And so I automatically assume it's like, okay, like they're probably a part of the Chantry somehow, but what are they? And it attracting an idea of like, oh, these are like the people who come in when, you know, shit gets down.
Yeah, true. So, let's talk about like what they do. Maybe not what they do, but like who they are as an organization. Mm-hmm. And I think there's two huge things that we got to talk about. And the first is lyrium. So Seekers do not use lyrium, famously do not use lyrium. And so this makes their abilities very different from Templars. Even though they're able to utilize Templar abilities. It's kind of like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that. So Seekers develop their abilities through ritual and many years of dedicated training. And they can't be possessed, and they are immune to mind control. Regular Templars are not immune to those things. And then of course some Seekers can also gain other gifts, especially if they're particularly talented. And depending on the individual, some of these gifts can be something like setting the lyrium within a person's blood aflame and more. Cassandra mentions this when you talk to her about Seekers and Inquisition.
And I think this ability about like being able to use the Templars' abilities and the immunity to possession and mind control is probably what makes the Seekers invaluable.
Yeah, I agree.
And in a lot of ways, the Seekers, I feel like, should be the ones mainly watching the mages, because they don't become lyrium addicts.
Right.
And, you know, we see, especially in the Broken Circle quest and Origin, like, the demons don't just stick to the mages. You encounter so many possessed Templars and demons dealing with Templars, and... So
true. So true. I feel like the system would be so much healthier if there was, like, one Seeker that was just stationed at every circle.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what they did.
And, like, if you look at it, like, Cassandra is, ironically, so much more level-headed than any Templar we meet. Even Cullen, like, she, and, like, the interaction that she has with Cullen, when Cullen is basically like, you need to relieve me of duty because I'm having lyrium withdrawals. And sorry, spoiler for Dragon Age Inquisition.
Yeah. I think most people know.
And so, and it's just, like, it's flat out, like, it's not emotionless, but it's flat out like just authoritative the way Cassandra responds, and just like, you're not at that point. We're not there. Calm down, relax.
Well, you know, you also have to think about it, like, just by nature of who they are as individuals, like, and I'm not talking about their personality, I'm talking about their training, like, she outranks him. Mm-hmm. In the Inquisition, I mean, at the beginning at least, and also by their roles as a Seeker and a former Templar. So, like, I think, of course, it makes sense that he would be deferential to her and she would be authoritative with him because of that.
Right.
But you're right, generally, like, the only time I think she is unreasonable, or not even unreasonable, but very emotional, is when you do the quest you just did, her personal quest, where she's finding all these Seekers that have been destroyed and infected with red lyrium and all this stuff. She's absolutely distraught, as anyone would be. But even then, she doesn't just, like, mindlessly go into a rage. She doesn't go into a killing spree. She doesn't just, like, fall down and sob. Like, she doesn't do any of those things. She still is able to keep it together. And I think it is also hard to kind of suss out whether or not that's just Cassandra or whether or not that's part of being a seeker, but my personal opinion is that it's probably a mix of both.
Right. And I think there are two other times besides the ones you mentioned where Cassandra is probably on the brink of losing it. And one is when we first see her in Dragon Age Inquisition, where she's interrogating you, which makes sense because she's riddled with grief.
True. And I know the next one you're going to say.
What is
when
it?
She finds out about Varric lying to her about Hawk.
Yes. I mean, she is close to...
She almost kills him.
Right. And, like, it makes sense because, you know, she was kind of banking on, like, where she was going after the Kirkwall incident was like, okay, we need these people who hold this great influence over Thedas. And, like, the hero of Ferelden, if alive, like, yes, that's absolutely a person. They stopped the Blight. They worked against insurmountable odds to bring that. And then Hawk, obviously, takes a huge role in the Kirkwall incident. And really, no matter who Hawk decides to side with, he has stakes in she has stakes in both camps.
Right. You're right. That's absolutely true. And I think from Cassandra's point of view, she's not thinking rationally in that moment. Like, she's very much thinking that she's being led by her grief, which I understand. She is thinking that if Varric had told me where Hawk was, I could have gone and gotten Hawk to be the Inquisitor, and then none of this stuff at the Conclave would have ever happened. The Divine would have been alive. The war probably wouldn't have started, and we'd be fine. But Varric is coming at it like, no, if I had told you where Hawk was, Hawk would be dead. Don't you think Hawk is given enough? And that's the whole argument. And I tend to side with Varric on that one.
It's a really heartbreaking, like, statement when Varric leaves and he just looks... The animation is so perfect because he looks at Cassandra with this just look of just complete, like, grief and sorrow and just says, you people have done enough to Hawk.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, as this is not the mini-sode about Cassandra, let's get back to the Seekers. I just have one more point before we get into our side character, and that's about Tranquility. And this is a little bit spoilery, so beware if you haven't finished the game. But to become a Seeker, the initiate must spend months undergoing a special vigil. And it's a full year almost of fasting, prayer, and separation from all distractions, including other people. So they're isolated for almost a year, and they're fasting. They empty themselves of all emotion, and they focus only on the purity of their devotion. This renders the initiate, the potential seeker, it makes them tranquil. And the vigil, what the point of the vigil is that you're summoning a spirit of faith that then touches the initiate's mind, which then breaks the tranquility, giving the seeker their powers, their abilities. The ritual, as we know from Inquisition, is kept secret from all of the seekers and even from the Chantry, being only known by the Lord, Lady, High Seeker. And Cassandra finds out because, you know, pretty much the entire Seeker Order is not alive anymore. And I think that's really important to talk about because that's a huge secret with huge implications for the rest of Thedas. I mean...
It starts well, I wouldn't say it starts. It is the match that lights the powder keg of the Templar Mage War.
I kind of agree with that. I mean, I think when I look at all of these historical events, I think the beginning of this war really is the annulment at the circle in Daresmud in Ravane. Because they totally annul this whole circle that is arguably like the freest of all the circles. It's more of a boarding school. They let them go home. It's just more lax all the way around. And
Ravane Ravane has a much more lax view of magic.
Right, exactly. So it makes sense that their circle would be that way. And the whole circle gets annulled for not really anything explicit other than just like being too lax, which then does two things really. Then Anders does what he does in Kirkwall and in Val Royeaux. Their revolution is brewing, which we learn about in Asunder. So kind of those two things are happening not quite at the same time, but in similar time frames. And then they find out that Tranquility can be reversed thanks to Wynn and Shale and Reese and Evangeline. Mm-hmm. And it all just goes and up in flames. So I looked to the circle in Dareswood as that's the beginning of this war.
Right. And I think that the annulment in Dareswood really gives me sympathy towards the mages. And like I would move to rebellion because at this point it's like I don't control my own fate. My fate is based on the goodness and morality of a group of addicts, basically, is how I would view it.
Right. Right.
And that is terrifying and it's oppressive and it makes sense. I mean, I'm not quiet about my dislike of Anders, but I do get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you have any more thoughts about the Seekers, or can we move on?
I think that the Seekers, I really think that, to reiterate this point, that making Templars and Seekers as separate groups, even though they're kind of not separate, but they are separate.
They are separate.
Is kind of a mistake. And I guess, like, the more Seekers there are, the more risk there is that their rituals could become more knowledge, or that, you know, they could realize that the Rite of Tranquility could be reversed. But I think that having the Watchers not require lyrium and be immune to possession, it's like the perfect defense against what they fear so much.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I really honestly, doing this research into the Seekers, it makes me feel like Templars are extraneous. Like, they're not needed. Mm-hmm. You can just have 5 Seekers stationed at a circle and obviously make changes to the circles to make them more like
nurturing,
school-like and nurturing, and like all of those things that we talked about last episode. But just station 5 Seekers there and you're good. Like, they can take out one of them could just take out half the thing. Like, 5 honestly is a little bit of overkill anyway. Right. So it makes me feel like Templars are not even needed. Like, they're the middlemen in their story.
And Seekers, you don't have to worry about a blood mage infiltrating the circle and controlling your Seeker.
Exactly.
But that's not true with a Templar. And, like, if Meredith had been a Seeker, it might have not been as bad.
Yeah. We'll never know the answer to that.
Right.
But, yeah.
And then my other thing is just a kind of quick little tangent question. Isn't the spirit that inhabits Wynn a spirit of faith?
Yes, generally, I think. I'm not sure if they ever actually officially say that it's a spirit of faith, but she thinks it's a spirit of faith. Yeah. But she's like kind of guessing at it. So it could be something different.
It would explain, like, I do think that Wynn has not unnatural, but a surprising amount of power for a mage.
Yeah.
And, like, just the things that she can endure, and, like, stat-wise,
That's fair.
And so, but it's really interesting implications of kind of combining that a spirit of faith touches the Seeker and liberates them from Tranquility, and you have this mage that was saved by a spirit of faith, and the mesh of that, and, like, because of that, if Wynn was made tranquil, would she just become a Seeker?
That's interesting. Probably not, because she doesn't go through the vigil and all that kind of stuff.
Right, but
that's an interesting thought experiment.
Yes, but we'll never know because Wynn is not alive and well.
Unlike what the keep says,
Yes.
she is not alive. Spoiler, I'm sorry.
Asunder. Yeah.
Anyway. So, let's talk about some known members. Are you ready?
You want me to read the list of notable Seekers?
Oh, I can do it. Either one.
Okay, I can do it.
Okay, cool. Do it.
So obviously, notable Seekers are obviously Cassandra, blah, 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 Pentagast, 59th in line for the Navaran throne.
I think it's 54th.
Yeah. It's a ridiculously large number. And then this one is interesting. Inquisitor Emeritus. Is he like acclaimed individual?
I think it's just because he was the Inquisitor when they were all kind of the same thing. But I saw that on the wiki and I was like, you know what? Let's include it. I don't know if it's disputed. I don't know if he underwent the vigil or anything. I think, but yeah, so he's included on the list.
And just an interesting thing about that would mean that if you have Inquisitor Emeritus being a Seeker, that means that one of the first Seekers is an elf.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Lord Seeker Lambert Von Reeves, who is the Lord Seeker before High Lord Seeker Lucius, who is another one, Korn, who is the High Seeker we see in Inquisition. Seeker Byron, who takes a major role in the Dawn of the Seeker movie. And then Seeker Daniel, who you meet in Promised Destruction, and is very sad.
It is very sad.
Yes.
Yeah, so those are the ones we know. I think there are a few more that we know of, but not anyone that's like directly related.
Yeah.
Or has a huge role. All right. So you ready for our side character of the day?
Yes, I am.
All right. So today's side character is Lord Seeker or High Seeker Lambert Van Reeves, and he is one of the main characters from Asunder. And I know not everybody has read this book, and so if you haven't and you're concerned about spoilers, you should probably not listen to the rest of this episode, because the next 10 minutes are going to be super spoilery, and we can't really tell his story without getting into spoilers, so that's just what it's going to have to be. So you can come back and listen once you finish the book. But Lord Seeker Lambert is the head of the Seekers from 937 to 940 Dragon, which is not a long time, only 3 years. He does die, spoiler, very quickly in this story. Well, not very quickly, but he dies a younger death. So that's just a heads up. But, Lord Seeker Lambert was born in 892, blessed, in Orlais. So he is 45 years old, in Asunder when we first meet him. Ish. Maybe 43, depending on the date. I don't know the exact date for when that book takes place. Y'all know I'm not good with dates. Anyway. So Lambert grew up in a wealthy and noble Orlesian family. Not surprising to me. He became a Templar at the age of 16 and served in Ghislaine. And he eventually became Knight Captain in 917 Dragon. So, this is where his story gets kind of interesting. When he was Knight Captain, he was charged with leading a group of Templars to recapture a group of escaped apostates on the border of the Tevinter Imperium. The apostates were taken captive by a larger group of Imperial Templars from Tevinter in the city of Cayman Brea. The confrontation with the Imperial Templars would have led to war, but Lambert was able to negotiate with them in order to prevent a catastrophe. This earned him the respect and friendship of the leader of the Imperial Templars. Their leader is Magister Urian Nihalius. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but... And it also earned him renown with the Seekers of Truth, which then led him to be inducted in 921 Dragon. So he started as a Templar first and became a Seeker. I don't know if that's common just because we don't know enough about it. To me, it seems like it's it's not common, that most people join the Seekers as a child and then grow up and become a full Seeker, not like transferring between the two. So Lord Seeker Lambert then served as the Seeker ambassador to Tevinter, which he hated. He absolutely hated. He, during this time, became much, much more extreme in his views toward magic while he was living in Tevinter. And while also in Tevinter, he organized a coup that led to the arrest of the Black Divine in Tevinter, as well as the arrests of 5 high-ranking magisters. This coup elevated his friend, Magister Urian, to become Black Divine. Once Urian gained his position, he became obsessed with keeping his power and resorted to any cost. Of course, we know this includes blood magic. This was really hard for Lambert. Super extremely disillusioning to Lambert. And it caused him to become much more conservative in his views toward magic. And then ultimately he left Tevinter entirely. And you know what? Honestly, if I put myself in his shoes and try to think about it and try to have empathy toward him, even though I can't stand his character, I understand how he gets there. Because, you know, he doesn't start out as this super hateful person when he's just a regular person in the Templars. In fact, he's preventing catastrophe. He's preventing more death. He's preventing unnecessary death. And he gets sent off to Tevinter, where he sees blood magic after blood magic after blood magic after death after assassination and all this stuff. And the one person he's friends with turns to blood magic too. I get it. I would become disillusioned too. I have become disillusioned with institutions for less.
Right.
So I get where he's coming from.
And it's a great point of acknowledging that, like, the individuals who join the Templars or the Seekers often aren't, some of them do, but often are not joining because they want to hold this power over mages or abuse them. They're joining because out of this instinct to protect them, or they think it's a way for them to do good or to bring honor. And it's really like what we're pointing out when we talk about the critique of the Templar and the Seeker is a critique with the institution, a critique with the ideology and the theology towards magic that leads to an abuse of power almost always.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I'll say a lot of Templars, and I'm sure Seekers, but mostly Templars, become Templars because they have no other options. You know, that's just true. It's just true. It's the reason why there's a lot of people in our society who join the military, because they have no other option and because it'll bring honor into their family. And I don't fault them at all. Just like I don't fault the Templars who feel like they have to do that. So back to Lambert a little bit. Once he left Tevinter, he pretty quickly impressed a lot of the Seekers in Orlais. And ultimately this led to him becoming High Seeker in 937 Dragon. So Lambert is one of the main characters in the book Asunder, and that's written by David Gator. And he does a lot in this book. He is a very hateable character. He's pretty terrible to everyone. Like, he's not a nice person. I don't think he's nice to a single person in the whole game, or in the whole movie, or in the whole book. But essentially, he comes to the Circle after a failed assassination attempt on Divine Justinia V. He removes the Knight Commander, and he investigates both the mages and the Templars in the Circle. And if you want more info on this, I've tried to keep spoilers to a minimum, but if you want more info on it, you should go read Asunder. And at the end of the book, or actually like 2/3 of the way through the book, Lambert basically accuses like all of the mages of treason, attempts to kill them all, and also attempts to kill Cole in the process, because Cole is a main character in this book. And this is another act, like we talked about earlier. I think this is another act that really does lead to the Mage Templar War. This is kind of like it's kind of like a foil to Anders, I think. Anders really instigates stuff in Kirkwall, and it's like the mage side of killing people. But this incident is really like the Templars or the Seekers version of being unfair to the mages. So I think those two actions are good foils to each other. I definitely think one is worse than the other, but anyways.
And I think that it points to a thing about like an understanding the escalation of the mage war is that, this annulment in Rouvain, the Kirkwall incident, this revolution in Val Royeaux and the attempted annulment of that circle, all happen not like right after each other, but in a close enough sequence
soon
that they build off of each other.
Yeah, within a couple years. And it may not even be that long, within 1 year probably. So that's really significant. But at the end of this book, Lambert retires to his room. And he's basically held at knife point by Cole, who reveals his story. And Cole's story, if you're not aware, is that there was a young mage named Cole, who was imprisoned in the White Spire in the Circle in Val Royeaux, but was forgotten about by the Templars. And instead, when he was dying, he was comforted in his final moments by the spirit that we later know as Cole. The Templars who guarded him covered all of this up, all evidence of his death, to hide their shame, to hide what they did. And the spirit was helpless to act at the time. He couldn't really do anything about it. And Cole tells Lambert to look into his eyes, which is basically the same mantra he recites to his other victims. And then he kills Lambert. So Lambert's death, there's a lot of other things that happen in between. I've skimmed over a lot. Like a lot. So again, if you're interested in this story, you should definitely read the book. But Lambert's death is mistakenly presumed to be retribution from the Mage Rebellion. So, of course, because Cole's a spirit, they can't really prove any of it. They were the only ones there. I think Reese was there too. But anyways, so Lambert's death, it's got wide-reaching consequences because after he dies, Lucius Corrin succeeds him as the High Seeker. And as we know, Corrin is like not a good guy. He's the one that like punches the Chantry sister in the face in Inquisition when you first go to Val Royeaux. And he continues his predecessor's crusade. And we can talk about Red Lyrium here if you want to, because you just did this quest, Promise of Destruction, where we're investigating the prevalence of Red Lyrium in the Seekers and how that happened. And there's a lot of debate on when the Red Lyrium came into the Seekers, I think. Whether it was under Lambert, whether it was under Lucius. Who knows? Mm-hmm. Do we know? What do you think?
Well, it's a very interesting thing that happens because he knows Lucius can't be possessed, so this envy demon can't be controlling him. So he either has killed. So like when you first find out about the envy demon impersonating Lucius, everyone's like, well, Lucius must be dead because he can't be mind controlled, he can't be possessed. So the envy demon probably killed him and then took his form. But what actually happens is Lucius allowed the envy demon to take his place. And that supplied him with Red Lyrium, and because Red Lyrium was, Seekers seemed to be resistant to Red Lyrium, which probably has to do with something about possession, because I'm just guessing Red Lyrium contains the blight. I would assume that Seekers might even be a little bit immune to the blight, or resistant to the blight, because the blight itself is kind of a form of mind control, because it links you to this kind of hive mind that is the Darkspawn.
Right.
And so he starts experimenting on Seekers, and the Envy Demon is supplying the Seekers to him, to Kaer Oswin. And when that happens or what happens is, I don't really know. But
yeah, it's definitely interesting. I'm kind of the opinion, I don't think Lambert would have ever allowed an Envy Demon to possess him or control him in any way. I don't think he would have been okay with that. But I find it hard to believe that all of the Red Lyrium starts with Lucius. I just don't think there's enough time in the timeline for it to all happen that way. So my guess is that kind of Lambert may have been into the Red Lyrium stuff, but not the Envy Demon stuff.
Right. We know that the Red Lyrium that they get supplied obviously comes from the Deep Roads, and there's the Lyrium mine in the Emprise, and the Lyrium smuggling and stuff that happens in the Emerald Graves. But I would think that, given that Corypheus has a unique control over the Blight and blighted creatures, he might be able to call forth Red Lyrium.
Oh.
And this is the establishment of Red Lyrium, and this we'll get into when we talk about Lyrium and magic. But the Blight can only infect living beings.
That's interesting.
Which, it's what Bianca says to Varric, the implications that Red Lyrium contains the Blight are huge. Because that means that Lyrium at some point is an organic, or is a living being. And so Corypheus might have some control and allow Red Lyrium to prop up. And, we see Red Lyrium at this Temple of Sacred Ashes when we go there in the beginning of Inquisition. And so I'm assuming that he used that to fuel his spell explosion thing.
Right, absolutely. But that's kind of off topic.
Right. But that's my point. I think that it is possible that the Red Lyrium does begin with Lucius, because obviously, Alexius, the Fear Demon, the Tevinter Magister, the Envy Demon, they are all agents of Corypheus. So it makes me think that Corypheus can sort of communicate with the Fade a little bit to organize all these demons to come in. And so perhaps Corypheus is a master of playing on what other people want. And so I would assume that Corypheus either approaches Lambert or Lucius and offers them a way to control these mages.
Yeah, I definitely see that. But I don't think I think Lambert hates magic and blood magic so much that he would never agree to that because of who Corypheus is. I don't think we can say the same about Lucius.
No. Lucius is very much, at least from what we meet of him, very much a person concerned with his own power, and he hides that in I'm exposing the corruption of the Chantry and the Seekers and everything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's all we've got about the Seekers.
Yeah, well, we'll keep moving on with these factions. I do think that the Seekers are one of the more interesting factions, just because there's a little bit more of mystery. But thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all next week on the Dragon Age Lorecast. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. As always, you can find us on Twitter at DALorecast. If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, email them to us at dalorecast@gmail.com. The Dragon Age Lorecast is a part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club. You can join the Robots Radio Network Discord by clicking the link in our episode description. If you enjoyed our show, we'd love it if you'd subscribe and give us a review. See you next time.
How well do you know your video game lovers? Have you ever wondered how your video game bays stack up against all the other delectable digital dates?
I'm Genesis, the girl whose motto in life is love, laugh, tequila. And on Two Girls, One Ship, we analyze, rate, and review all that the world of video game romances has to offer.
And I'm Vervada, the hopeless romantic cat lady and lifelong gamer.
But you should know that our podcast centers on character and romance analysis and doesn't shy away from exploring the fun of physical connection.
Or from the deep emotional connections built between two characters, using specific in-game dialogue and the overall narrative journey. So join the Two Girls, One Ship shipsters, and remember,
beauty is in the eye of the controller.